The old saying is, don't fight the Fed.
Don't fight the Fed.
Don't fight the Fed.
Rule number one as a young trader you're taught is don't fight the Fed.
I don't know what the hangover is going to look like down the road from all this extraordinary stimulus, but for now, the markets love it. Don't fight the Fed.
Hey, Ken, roll one.
Today is Tuesday, May the 27th, 2025, and I would like to use an intersection of radical extremism to begin to explain why extremist movements do not work. I'll begin with a post from yesterday on Memorial Day about distinctions between activism and extremism. I'll then present clips from two frontline documentaries from 2019 and 2021 to allow you to draw some conclusions about why a group who is unified, meaning everyone is in agreement, is much different than a group who is ubiquitous, which means we are all the same. There is a distinct line between activism and extremism, and it is defined by motivation and intent. You must ask yourself, what is the goal? And then, if the goal is achieved, what then happens next? Everyone has had an experience that they wish were different or would have never occurred in the first place. Sometimes those experiences cloud the way people envision the future. They can see a more positive outcome where those kinds of experiences are transformed into something completely avoidable or better for themselves and everyone affected in the same or similar ways. This usually manifests as protest. People are attracted to activism and extremism because of very personal ideologies around these experiences. It means that before they ever connect with even one person who shares their views, they have envisioned something for themselves and other people. Whatever that is will lead a person to the path that is most meaningful to them to pursue and have activated in a collective way. An activist could write a 4-page journalistic warning and declaration, but it all can be condensed down to a very basic if blank, then blank statement. If you agree, then it is likely you will begin to follow that person and their ideologies. An extremist could write a 30-page manifesto, but it can all be condensed down to a very basic if blank, then blank statement. If you agree, then it is likely you begin to follow that person and their ideologies. No collective will ever achieve 100% consensus on how to achieve the desired outcome because each person's experience and motivating factor or factors will be unique to them. To act, however, there must be at least one outcome that every person involved shares as a mutual goal. This is where leadership becomes critical. How do you determine who is qualified to lead you? What criteria do you use? And then how do you evaluate that criteria against any person you decide to follow? It cannot simply be any statements or rhetoric they share online or via the media because people plagiarize the ideas of other people all the time. This is likely why the manifesto of extremists translate in disjointed and ununiform ways. These people are not capable of even reorganizing the ideas they collect and then piecing them together to allow the message to function as one voice that speaks their own ideas about what they believe should change. When activists meet and talk together, they are usually able to respond well to questions about their own if-then statements because it is very personal to them and they think about these things as a matter of daily existence. When extremists meet and talk together, the leaders are usually people who want to be in charge, have their own agenda, and tend to reject any ideas that are antagonistic toward their goals. They tend to become confrontational when questioned or challenged and often use humiliation to silence rational voices. With both activism and extremism, there will be a difference in opinion about how to achieve the goal. What separates the two approaches to change is the function of the outcome. If we achieve the goal, then what happens? In other words, where are we going? A leader should be someone who has both demonstrated and observable ability in a skill that the group agrees is necessary to complete any task related to achieving a goal. It means that the person has developed the ability to think about the problem, develop a plan to address the problem, and to successfully execute the plan evidenced by a problem being resolved. Keep in mind that there are some things that may be problematic in some situations that are the solution in other situations. Being able to assess the difference is another aspect of leadership capacity that would need to be evaluated, because in the process of resolving one aspect of a problem, the person or group could simultaneously create more problems with achieving the goals due to damage caused by the functional aspects they still need. Can your leaders clearly articulate where you are going so that you understand why you should be following them? In a collective move of activism within a group focused on achieving a shared goal, the people who lead at various stages of the process will change because no one is the most qualified person for everything. You must know the strengths and weaknesses of every person involved, and at what point in the process it makes sense to allow the right person to lead their part because they are the most skilled in that area. This is called organizing. Extremists do not understand these considerations because their underlying goal is to be in charge. Therefore, their motivations are led by a desire to maintain the loyalties of people who are attracted to their rhetoric and capacity to effect observable change. Even if the leaders cannot clearly articulate how these methods will achieve the ultimate goals they all want to see, whatever it takes to maintain loyalties. That isn't activism. It's narcissism at best and psychopathy in the most extreme cases. People are almost never attracted to causes that work against the life they want and the world they want to live in. Extremism is always a perverse ideal coated with a well thought out truth most people can believe in. What then usually happens is that in the process of being led by unqualified leaders, many of whom have absolutely nothing to lose and who know the right things to say to the right people, is that they become culpable in ways that are difficult to extract themselves from after being involved in something that causes extreme harm or violates critical rules and expectations of society. If you have in your heart and mind a goal to see a more positive outcome, where the kinds of negative experiences you have had are transformed into something completely avoidable or better for yourself and everyone affected, no one should be able to tell you that isn't important to you, even if it isn't important to them. If then you cannot personally walk yourself through a conclusive outcome for any intervention you agree to take part of, you are making a mistake. If we achieve that, then what? Then what? Then what? Until you can clearly see that by completing each task and following those steps, the desired goal can be achieved. If your leaders cannot logically walk you through that process, they are not qualified to lead you, because where are you all going? There are no strategies I have discussed here that do not mirror participants in the mastermind groups, which is essentially a cult. There is no shortage of people online who have shared significant abuses experienced in these kinds of groups. The arguments against their claims is that participation is voluntary and no one is forced to do anything they don't agree to. My question then is whether people want change for a better life and world, safety, health, a sense of acceptance and belonging, or money, and to be given benefits like coverage, both assurance and insurance, notoriety or celebrity, and or things, houses, cars, stock options, etc. When looking for a collective, how do you find your people? How do you know whether or not you have found them? It's an important question because butterflies don't crawl. Now I'd like to present to you the Frontline documentary clips and ask that as you watch, you understand that although none of the people featured are government elected officials, our legislators are responsible for addressing all of the issues that are discussed. They are all talking about the impact of economic policies and decisions on their daily lives as they live it. How would these people as individuals be able to come together as a collective to impact change? More importantly, how might their approach change if instead of money and the economy, their focus was on healthy families?
Mohammed Al-Arian remembers it well. He was running the largest bond fund in the world at the time and made a fortune for his firm following the Fed's lead.
Don't fight the Fed. The Fed is the one institution that has a printing press in the basement and there's no limits to how much it can use. That is what makes the Fed such an influential player in the marketplace.
This is all money printed on paper. Why can't they be spent the same way? I'm not being sarcastic here. I want you to seriously consider your answer.
Keep an eye on the Treasury market.
Al-Arian's firm helped advise the Fed on its QE experiment. He told me the expectation was that the low interest rates in QE would have a strong knock-on effect on the wider economy.
That was the theory. In practice, the Fed was very successful in terms of moving asset prices. It was much less successful in moving the economy. And the result of that is we got the largest disconnect ever between Main Street and Wall Street, between the economy and finance.
The banks are sitting on their butts and they're still not lending money. And until
One of the problems was that the banks were holding on to a lot of the money instead of making it available to borrowers.
The banking sector is broken.
Even some of the largest beneficiaries of this trend told me it made them uncomfortable, like legendary investor Jeremy Grantham.
In my career in America, the percentage of GDP that goes to finance has gone from 3.5 to 8.5. In a way, we're like a giant bloodsucker, and we have more than doubled in size and sucking more than twice the blood out of the rest of the economy. And we do not generate any widgets. We do not generate any real increase in income. We are just a cost.
When you say we, you mean you and other members of the financial community have been this kind of bloodsucker on the economy? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, collectively, we fulfill a completely necessary service. But what we have done is created layers upon layers of more and more convoluted, expensive financial instruments. And that's what makes all the profits for the financial industry. And it's taken a lot of ingenuity and salesmanship to make this happen, and a lot of lobbying in Congress, et cetera, et cetera. And we have imposed on the rest of the economy the idea that banking and finance are utterly important at all times. If you do anything wrong to us, the entire economy will collapse in ragged disarray. Over the years, we've been trained to believe that the Fed is on our side. What the Fed has trained us to believe is that if we make a bet in the market and we win, we're on our own. We get to keep the profits. If we lose, they will bend every effort and every dollar they can get their hands on, one way or another, to bail us out. This is asymmetry of the most splendid kind.
A-Speeds, go ahead and clap it off, please.
Billionaire bond investor Howard Marks called the Fed out at the time, saying it was undercutting the way the free market is supposed to work.
There are negative ramifications to this, one called moral hazard, which means conditioning people to believe that if there's a problem, the government will bail you out. And if people really believe that, then there's no downside to risky behavior. Because if there's a problem, it won't fall on you, you'll get bailed out. If you play it aggressively and succeed, you make money. If you play it aggressively and fail, you'll get bailed out.
So has moral hazard gotten worse as a result of this bailout?
There's no barometer of moral hazard, so I can't give you a reading. All I can say is that for the last year or so, risk-taking has been rewarded, and that tends to bring on more risk-taking.
Do you see moral hazard in what has just happened?
Oh, absolutely. I think now, the entire business community has had a taste of bailouts, and boy, it doesn't work really nicely. So I fear that now the Fed stepping in, not just to bail out Wall Street, but the entire, corporate America is starting to be embedded into people's thinking. People talk about the survival of capitalism, but this is the biggest threat to capitalism. In good times, when anybody can make money, you reap those profits. In bad times, the Fed just keeps stepping in. You have this never-ending ratchet up. The market's never correct.
It's like a no-lose casino.
It is a no-lose casino. That's exactly right.
They have the housing market, the stock market, and the bond market all overpriced at the same time. And they will not be able to prevent, sooner or later, the asset prices coming back down. So we are playing with fire because we have the three great asset classes moving into bubble territory simultaneously.
There's a growing conversation right now about the Fed's role, about whether it's driving wealth inequality, whether it's driving asset prices into dangerous territory that could pop right in our faces, and whether the financial system can withstand that. I mean, there are these seemingly legitimate questions about being in what seems to be uncharted territory.
These questions come from people who are keen Wall Street observers or Wall Street. I never have once heard this line of questioning from a member of Congress that represents a low-income or minority district. Never once. They come to us and they say, why can't you do more? They never say, oh my gosh, you're just benefiting Wall Street, raise interest rates because I want to keep Wall Street in check. They say, help my constituents find work. So that's why, I find these questions amusing because I hear them all the time from Wall Street. And these are folks who don't care about what's actually happening on Main Street. I don't hear it from Main Street. I certainly don't hear it from low-income communities. And I've heard all of these questions before.
What did you think when you first heard that Trump was putting tariffs on steel?
I felt it was about time. I've watched the farmers get their subsidies. I've watched the banks bail out, the automotive industry bail out, and I've just watched us wither on the vine for the last 30 years.
Do you think it's going to help the town? Do you think it's going to help your hometowns?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you expecting to see?
Everybody always talks about jobs in America, and we hear that all the time. We want to see that reality happen. You can't just depend on foreign countries for steel. We've got to make it in the United States.
We just want China to play by the rules.
Right.
That's it. We don't want to bail out.
So you're saying it's not that you want your industry propped up.
No, not at all.
No. You want your industry
a level playing field.
You want a level playing field.
But using tariffs to level the playing field has a flip side. They've brought unwelcome consequences for many other U.S. businesses. I saw that not far from Middletown.
The state of Ohio could be the hardest hit by this looming trade war with Americans' biggest trading partner.
At Industrial Tube and Steel, Damon Gaynor's in the business of buying and reselling steel.
We buy from a bunch of steel mills. Our main bread and butter is distributing steel tubing.
Trump's tariffs on imported steel, essentially a 25% tax, ended up raising the price of American steel too. And that sent Gaynor's costs skyrocketing.
So how did you handle that? Did you guys eat that or did the customers eat it?
See, that's the hard part. We just have to pass it along to the customer. Our customer has to pass it along to their customer, and so on down the chain.
Do you think that there'll be a point, though, where the end consumer will just say, I can't afford this? This is too expensive?
Yeah, I think there's always that risk, and that's the thing with tariffs is, are you kind of artificially messing with the price of, what the market dictates?
And what people will be willing to pay.
And what people will be willing to pay. Yeah, absolutely. And
it's metal carboxylate.
CEO Tom Shepard sells products to China. And he also imports raw materials from China.
Our sales to China have gone down, and our raw materials from China have increased in cost.
How big of a problem is that for you?
Several $1 million of profit lost in a year.
Okay. Yeah, you're getting it from all sides then.
Yeah, that's right.
I know.
Because we can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
He talked in this kind of vernacular that kind of hit people in the gut, and particularly when we talked about trade and job shipping overseas.
What was his message to these people on trade? China's to blame?
The message is very simple, is that the elite ship the jobs overseas, and I'm going to bring it back.
Thank you, Indiana.
That message helped propel Trump to the presidency. And once there, he assembled his team of advisors on trade. To oversee economic policy, he brought in the former president of Goldman Sachs, Gary Cohn.
The job I had in the White House was to convene everyone who basically had an opinion on an economic topic and try and come up with a recommendation or two, or present to the president completely diametrically opposed opinions and allow the president to make a decision.
In the Roosevelt Room, we would have a trade meeting every Tuesday, and then we would take some version of that into the Oval in a smaller group. If you take all the other nastiness on the things like the Paris Accord and TPP, all this other stuff, roll it up and put it to the factor of 10, they don't compare to these weekly nasty trade meetings.
From the start, the weekly trade meetings surfaced deep divisions among Trump's advisors over how to deal with rising economic tensions with China. The two camps came to be known as the globalists and the nationalists. On the one side, the globalists included former Wall Street executives like Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin. On the other side, the nationalists included Bannon, along with Robert Lighthizer, and Peter Navarro, a hawkish economist whose film Death by China caught Trump's attention.
Problems facing America, its increasingly destructive trade relationship with a rapidly rising China.
The two camps disagreed sharply over whether aggressive measures like tariffs would help or hurt the American economy.
We had a mindset that to be a great power, it wasn't just your military, you had to be a great economic power. And a great power had to be built upon a great manufacturing base. To make America great again, you've got to bring manufacturing back to the country.
Some of the people that are very pro-tariff right now make an argument that the United States has lost its manufacturing base and that this is actually real people's lives at stake.
Well, the data would show manufacturing jobs have gone down in the United States. So I understand where they're saying there. The flip side is factory output, or what we produce in the United States, has actually gone up. There's this thing called technology that's happened in the United States. Factories have changed, but we have also created millions upon millions of jobs in new industries that didn't exist 20 years ago.
The split between globalists and nationalists was about more than just industrial policy. It reflected a fundamental difference over how best to confront China and what each saw as the endgame.
The nationalists said this is a great hegemonic, great power struggle. It's definitely two systems that couldn't be more radically different, right? And one of these two are going to win. We need not just a trade deal. We need fundamental structural changes in their economy.
Some of your former colleagues have sat exactly where you are and said, this is a winner-takes-all situation.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's the nationalist versus the globalist. The globalist, okay. As a globalist, as a market practitioner, I think that we can have a globalized world that works well. The question is, can we both be complementary to each other? I think the answer is yes.
These arguments would get quite personal. That we would get through the facts quickly because the two sides are just never going to agree what the facts are. Then it would get personal.
From time to time, there were people that tried to use unfootnoted, undocumented facts. It's my job to get rid of the undocumented, unfootnoted facts and make sure that those don't enter the Oval Office.
And a couple of times we had blow-ups. I mean, there was a blow-up in the Oval Office that Kelly had to, when first couple of days General Kelly was there, we have to exit and go back into the Roosevelt Room, and it's kind of in your face with a couple of people.
Where was Trump while these two parties are on different sides of
He
it.
has a default position. His default position is, build a wall. His default position is engage China in the economic war, get tariffs. But he's going to let you fight it out. Ware and I start to dust off the secret weapon we had to call a national security emergency, kind of what we're doing on the border right now. To use the national security emergency powers that are invested in the Defense Department to really start to go after steel, aluminum, maybe autos, but eventually technology. It's time to get it on.
At that point, were you disappointed? Were you frustrated?
If you adamantly believe that something doesn't make sense, you're personally disappointed, but ultimately it's not your decision to make.
Within a month, Cohn would leave the White House. The nationalists had won.
President Trump.
What does Trump want from China? What did the camp in the White House that you were in, what do you want?
I believe you need actually a change of the top leaders in the Chinese Communist Party.
How on earth?
I think the goal into China is quite simply is to break the back of this totalitarian mercantilist economic society.
You're talking about regime change.
Well, first off, nobody in the White House was talking about that, okay? And the president would never even consider that. They're talking about a trade deal and some fundamental economic change. I'm saying one of these two are gonna, this mercantilist, totalitarian system that has a network effect, or the kind of, liberal, democratic West. One of those two systems is gonna be the system at the end of the day.